Welcome to the 5th episode of Florida Gators Live. Today's episode, we're going to continue with top 5, bottom 5. Florida's needs to be a good team in 2025. How DJ Lagway impacts this team overall, especially going into the LSU game. We're also going to be giving our Florida LSU predictions. It is I, Tyler Whitfield, with Tyler Natuno again. How's it going today, Tyler?
Yeah, doing pretty good, Tyler. Ready to put this Texas game behind us, that's for sure. Not sure how much better it's going to get moving forward, but ready to look ahead to LSU here.
I know what you mean. I like to go watch these games a bit before I do this show. I did the first half. I did the scoring plays of the first half, reviewing the LSU game. The Texas game. I just was not in the right place to do that. So
Yeah.
Let's just get over with the Texas stuff. Sub Daniel Barry, evening everyone. Thanks for joining. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. But let's get into our top 5, bottom 5. We started with our top 5 last week. We'll start with the bottom 5. So we go 5 for top and then or bottom, and then we alternate between top 5 and bottom. So I'll go first. So I feel like this week wasn't as much to take away as the score would indicate. So my 5th is just going to be the depth of the team. Not many teams can go that deep. But when we're looking at negatives for this game, I'm just going to have to stick with the depth and say, hey, maybe we should have had a third-string quarterback. Maybe we should have had 6th-stringer cornerbacks. It's not really much to take away. What do you have for your 5th and bottom 5?
Yeah, I've got right now, it's sort of relating to the depth. I've got a player. I've got Jordan Castell, a guy that, I think a lot of people thought coming into this year as a sophomore could be poised for a nice season. And there have been moments. But I think, when you've got the injuries that you have in the secondary right now, you're really relying on a guy like that to make plays and step up. And I don't really feel he's doing that. Had a couple bad beats yesterday, got burned. That's a talented Texas team, fast and athletic, no doubt about it. I think he's going to continue to get better. But, when you're in the position you're in right now with everyone, I think that's a guy that you really need to be able to rely on. And I'm not sure they can right now.
Yeah, going back to my thing, it's just that next man up mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And to have that next man up mentality, you need your starters who are still there to take leadership and show them what to do. I'm going to get to Castell later on in the show, but I've dogged on him a lot on this show already in other episodes, so I won't go too much onto him right now. But going to our 5th on the top 5. So this kind of sounds weird to say, but I feel like our issues are very obvious as a team. We talked about yesterday with Pete Nako saying that we're going to put money into the portal. I feel like when you have a lot of teams that just get blown out and have, this was our 5th loss now, 5 losses, you're like, okay, they need to fix everywhere, or it's like, maybe that guy's young. I feel like our team issues are pretty obvious. I don't want to keep dogging on Castell, but you got an issue there. You had an issue with your quarterback situation. Maybe linebackers a little bit. I like the defensive line, but I feel like a good coach should be able to get these players in the transfer portal next year to where a team can take a step next year.
Yeah, totally. No, I'm with you there. And for my next point, in bottom 5, I got another player. It's kind of an obvious
top 5.
Or sorry. Yeah. Oh, okay. Understood. Okay. So next in my top 5, I've got Miles Graham, a young guy, a freshman linebacker, obviously a legacy here. Haven't gotten to see him play a ton this season, but he stepped up with a forced fumble yesterday. Yep. And I think it's just hard to find a lot of positives here when you look at this defense, especially with the way that it played yesterday. But I think if you're trying to find something, it's the fact that as things stand right now, Billy's sticking around, so you would expect that a lot of these young guys will too. And he's a guy that I thought stepped up and made some nice plays.
Absolutely did. I'll be talking about him actually later in my top 5. But so next, number 4 in my bottom 5. So I have it listed as punted. I feel like going into this game, Billy kind of just set this game aside. He knew that we probably weren't going to win this game, and that sat DJ Lagway Now that's a smart decision probably for his future. But I feel like throughout the rest of the game, we didn't really do anything fancy. Kind of just did simple runs, simple passes, which, you see from his offense a lot, but still, maybe if he's really trying to win this game, he'll come up with something creative. We also saw we get to the 5-yard line. We're already down 2 scores. I mean, when you're playing a top 5 team, you probably need to be a little bit more aggressive. Maybe not go for it, but before those plays on the goal line, you try to create something that's going to be able to get you into the end zone. That was actually a 4th and 2 from the goal line, wasn't it? So maybe you do go for it there. So I feel like just going into the game that they kind of just accepted that they were going to lose and that the situation was dire and there wasn't really anything they could do.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, trying to kick early in the game, which is something I'll talk about a little bit later in mine, but I think when you're already falling behind, and the way that, they pretty much played to keep the no shutout streak intact, I think that kind of speaks for itself.
Mm-hmm. So what do you have next on your number 4 on your bottom 5?
Yeah, I got I wrote this down as a player, but I want to make it a little more broad because it's not fair. I think I got Aiden Warner, and it's really not even about Aiden Warner.
Yeah.
It's more about Billy Napier and the fact that, this is the situation you're in at quarterbacks in year, when it comes to quarterbacks in year 3. Like, I understand the injuries, like that's bad luck. It's not going to happen most of the time. But Graham Mertz, we knew had some injury, history. We knew that was a potential concern coming into the season. And, DJ Lagway ultimately was ready. It turned out. I don't think that was a given. Like, I don't think you could have assumed that true freshman DJ Lagway coming into the year would be ready to do what he's had to do if it came down to it. And ultimately you brought in Aiden Warner, a walk-on transfer from Yale who had, no playing time at Yale, and you bring in Clay Millen, who had, semi-decent playing time at Colorado State. Well, we've seen what Aiden Warner is. It's not good enough. And we haven't even seen Clay Millen. I have no idea what the deal is there. I mean, if we didn't see him during that yesterday, I don't see why you would see him at any point down the stretch here if Lagway's not able to go. So, yeah, I think my biggest concern is just the fact that you are 2 injuries away from just not having viable quarterback play whatsoever.
Absolutely. I mean, I get to Warner later on, so I don't want to talk on it too much. So I'm going to go to number 4 on my top 5. So you talked about Miles Graham. So I just have like the young players in general, the freshmen mostly, and maybe some sophomores you throw in there. But Jaden Ball, Jacoby Jackson, they're both in their 1st and 2nd year respectively. They're stepping up. They ran for over 200 yards combined on Texas, which, may just be Texas as the game's already over. But how often do you see a team run for 200 yards in a game where they get blown out? It doesn't feel like something you see that often. Right guard Bryce Levette, he's in his 2nd year. After the Miami game, I went and dissected it. I told you this already. And Bryce Levette, to me, was really one of the strong candidates for someone who could break out. And I feel like he definitely had a solid game. So I want to give him a little bit of a shout. Then on the defense, you already got to Miles Graham. He had the fumble. He forced a fumble. He's going to be a great player for us in the future, I hope. Aaron Childs, PFF, he was one of our top 5 highest graded players in the game, had 19 snaps. Shout out to him. Grimesley had 19 snaps that were pretty highly graded too. So you have 2 young guys there who not starting, but they were later in the game able to get some good reps on still SEC level talent.
Yeah, for sure. And looking at I'm kind of in the same boat as you in terms of looking at young guys. Like I've said, it's hard to find the positives on defense, but if you can, it's with some of the young guys. I've got a guy up front in TJ Searcy. Not a lot of pass rush against Quinn Ewers on this day, but he got the one. He got to him the one time, the 1 sack of the day for the Gators. So, that's something I think you like to see. Just again, guys that assuming Billy sticks around, you're going to be really relying on in the next year. I think it's nice to see that those guys are continuing to play hard, even, with the way things are going.
Absolutely. I didn't have Searcy on my list, but he absolutely deserves a shout out there too. Hasn't lived up to the expectations that we would have hoped after getting a ton of playing time last year, but maybe this is where he starts turning a corner and can build up to a lot of momentum for next year. So next up on my bottom 5 at the 3rd, you already mentioned him, Jordan Castell. I mean, we already talked about him needing to step up and show leadership to these younger guys, and he's just getting lost out there. He's not that physical of a safety. I mean, when you look at college football, you need a physical safety. I mean, you had Asad Turner get hurt in the first game of the season, and I assume he's out for injury for the rest of the year. I'll get to him later, actually. But you really need to see it from Castell, especially he showed so much promise early as a freshman. I gave him a little bit of a pass for struggling later on in the year based on him not being ready for the SEC with his body. But at this point, you have to be ready. And I hate dogging on him so much, but it's just the bottom five. It's just the truth.
Yeah. I mean, I won't, repeat myself too much here. I already kind of said my piece about Castell, but 100% agree. For me, next up in the bottom five, I've got the kicking game. Hasn't been a serious problem this season. I think Trey Smack has had some really timely misses throughout his career, like really unfortunate timing, but I still think he's a pretty reliable kicker in terms of, distance and consistency. Had a miss early in this game where probably wasn't going to make a difference, but like, man, as bad as things started early, you finally got something going, you get down the field and you have the chance to at least get on the board and grab some momentum, and you don't do it. And that really, I think when he missed that kick, a short kick under 35, I believe, was just kind of, to me, felt like oh, this is going to be bad,
Yeah, I believe it was a 22-yard field goal. Maybe that. But you also, if you make that field goal, maybe that next drive where you have a little bit of a drive where you get sacked out of field goal range, maybe you play a little safer because 14-6 is a one-score game. But yeah, he talked about timely misses last year against Arkansas in overtime, or to win it, not in overtime.
Yeah.
But missed that field goal to win it against Arkansas, which resulted in probably Billy's second worst loss. Maybe Vandy the year before was his worst loss. But yeah, Smack just had some untimely misses as a pretty decent kicker.
Yeah.
So going to number 3 on my top 5. So I talked about earlier how we kind of just punted this game. I'm going to give it to the play calling. I feel like we were calling plays that if you had Lagway in there would probably be working. There were a couple missed throws from Warner where if you have Lagway, he probably makes those throws. Or if you have the athleticism of someone like Lagway, they can make it. And you add him to the run game as well. Maybe you have a bit more success early on. Even though you did have good success early on, you had good enough to where you can excuse the bad QB play.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think, again, Aiden Warner is just so limited. I will have my criticisms about Billy as a play caller, and I think they do need to bring in an offensive coordinator, assuming he's sticking around for 2025. But I think it really down the stretch this season has not been among the primary issues for the Gators. The play calling. So I agree there. In my top 5, next in my top 5, you talked about the youth in the secondary. I've got a guy in Aaron Gates who I think is really starting to come on. Led the team with 8 tackles on Saturday. And I know it's not always what you want to see when someone in the secondary is leading you in tackles. That usually means guys are getting to the second level, so that's not great. But hey, he's getting there, putting himself in position to make plays. Obviously was really impactful in the Georgia game. So, with all these guys, all the injuries getting battled, it's a guy that I think, you have to like what you've seen.
Yeah, you absolutely do. Aaron Gates, he's had a couple turnovers this year. Didn't he have a pick in the Kentucky game as well?
I believe so. Yeah.
So back-to-back games with picks. Led the team in tackles this year. He's definitely showing out, and that star position with him and Denson. Hopefully, neither of them leave. Because it's going to be a really good position for us. Maybe they can also move around the field a bit, especially with the secondary depth for the end of this year. So definitely love to see that. So the bottom 2 on my bottom 5, we've already talked about it a lot. Aiden Warner. Don't really want to go on the guy too much because, as you said, he's a double legacy. That's probably the only reason he's at Florida, because of his double legacy status. I do wonder if he's beating out Clay Millen. Is this something you see in practice, or is Clay Millen just that bad? Does the injury just too much for him to withstand? I don't really even know, man. I mean, I don't want to keep going on Warner, so you can go ahead into your
Yeah, 100%. And my point, unfortunately, has a little bit to do with Warner too. Even though I already talked about him. My next bottom point is just turnovers as a whole. Really costly early in this game. Like again, I don't think it would have made a difference because you were just so overmatched on the defensive side of the ball in this game. But again, if you're going to have any chance, you can't be giving the ball away early in the game. And they did. You know, Aiden Warner had the pick. I think the picks were early in the second half, but
end
the
of
fumble
the
from
first half.
Jacoby.
Yeah, end of the first half
End of
and
the first
early.
half. Correct. Yeah.
Back to back.
So threw him in the middle 8, and then Jacoby Jackson had the fumble too. Like I just, you know, I think that it's a real. I mean, again, it's like I don't know what you expect in this game with all the guys that are down. Like, there's going to be some mistakes. There's going to be some forcing of things when you get down this far early. But just, you know, when the game was even theoretically in reach, just you know, gave the ball away and couldn't capitalize.
Yeah, I mean, turnovers killed us. This game, like, not saying we could have won this game because I don't think we could have, but it's a difference between this being a 2-score game possibly and it being the 32-point win for Texas.
Yeah.
Going number 2 on my top 5. This is his second time on this list. Is Chimere DK. Last time I had him on my list was against Tennessee. He had the touchdown catch to send it to overtime. He also had 2 big punt returns in that game. But he came in this game, got 95 yards. When you have that inexperienced young QB, it's nice for him to, while he's also missing the number 1 wide receiver on this team in Elijah Badger, it's nice to have a solid veteran that he can be open over the middle and get a ton of yards. He had a 30-yarder and like another 25-yarder. So got to give DK a lot of credit. And I have a feeling something's about to come up here.
Yeah, I was just laughing because I agree with everything you just said because Chimere DK is also my number 2 on my top 5. Like, I think he, you know, I'll be honest, I didn't have particularly high expectations for him coming into this year. I was really concerned about the fact that his production dropped off quite a bit at Wisconsin in 2023 with Graham Mertz leaving and with the change in the offense there. You know, I didn't know. I was like, I'm not sure how this is going to translate, even though obviously his best season was with Mertz. But he's been really impactful. And I think maybe he doesn't have like the raw skills of guys like Aiden Mizell or Trey Wilson or, you know, the route running of Elijah Badger. But I think he's just been all around a very reliable player. And, you know, with a lot of those guys down, like was the case yesterday, you know, made some plays. He obviously had the 39-yarder early in the game. That was kind of a big chunk of his 5 catches for 95 yards. But you know, a guy who's continuing to make plays, even as the offense is, you know, like I've said before, not really a credible offense.
Absolutely. He deserves all the credit. I could see him making a career in the NFL as like a wide receiver 4 on a team to where maybe if you have someone hurt, he gets a start or something like that. It just sounds like he seems like a very solid wide receiver who's not going to lose you anything.
Yeah, but, no, totally.
Getting to the bottom 5, so number 1 on the bottom 5, it goes along with the depth earlier. I feel like this is the biggest problem from this game was the DB room. Gone Castell earlier. Cormani McLean, he really, I'm not going to say he alone gave up 2 touchdowns, but 2 of their first 3 touchdowns were on plays where he should have been the one to make the stop. He got beat on a route from the receiver that resulted in a pretty easy throw and catch for Quinn Ewers to Golden, maybe? I can't remember who it was. And then there was also the screenplay to Wisner to where his small frame just doesn't allow him to beat his one-on-one blocker and make this tackle. Jameer Grimesley, he came off a season-ending injury as a senior in high school. So having him play in the SEC this early on against maybe the best unit of wide receivers we faced all year, just not a good look for him. I'm going to give these guys a chance to develop still, but they just had to go number 1 in the bottom 5.
Yeah, I mean, and not to be redundant here, but that's where they are for me too. I mean, look, you gave up almost 350 yards and 5 touchdowns to Quinn Ewers. This was an awful performance. And, you know, I've seen a lot of people say, like, look, what do you expect to happen when all those guys are hurt? And, like, I get it. I understand that. I still think you can hold Billy accountable for the fact that this is what the depth looks like in year 3.
Absolutely.
Injuries happen every year. You got to deal with it. Everyone's dealing with it. But, you know, most teams don't become sub-power conference level teams when they have top-level starters get hurt, you know. And I think that's just unacceptable at this point. Even with the comical amount of injuries there have been.
Well, I will say, I was looking through, usually for defenses for the past maybe 5-6 years, the standard you want to set kind of is like Georgia. You want to look to see how they're doing things. That's like the high you can be. I was looking at Georgia's corner room depth chart. Their cornerbacks 3, 4, and 5 are all true freshmen. So is this going along with the set that we've seen of college football players, just the transfer portal, just ruining teams' depth? And if you get these injuries, you could just be screwed. It's possible, but maybe not. So going on number 1 of my top 5, I got to give it to the run game. I mean, they ran for over 200 yards this game. Georgia, the run game looked really good. I mean, especially when Lagway was in, I really liked their run game against Georgia. And then even with him out, they still got a couple of good drives, where there was no other worry. Kind of the same in this game. They had 2 good drives early on with Warner in, and it didn't result in much or anything at all, actually. But then in the second half, maybe the backups were in for Texas, but we also had some backup offensive linemen in. So I got to give the 2 running backs and the run blocking a lot of credit.
Yeah, and we continue to be in lockstep with these. Like, look, pretty straightforward game to evaluate. Not a lot of positives, quite a few negatives. But yeah, I mean, I'm with you. Like, I talked about it on our show last night, but like, Texas knew what you were going to try to do in this game. There was no doubt. Whatever the even if the Lagway stuff was trying to throw them for a loop, I don't think it really. I don't think they were anticipating seeing DJ Lagway in this game. And in spite of that, knowing how one-dimensional Florida was going to be, you still had success. You still had Jacoby Jackson and Jaden Ball ripping off carries and depth in the running back room too. Young guys with Montrell out. Like, I think you got to really like what you see. And I mean, say what you will about Billy Napier, but he can deliver a productive run game for the most part. That's pretty true across the board.
That's something I didn't even mention since the Tennessee game. I feel like our running back room, like our running game, has looked really good, although too, like stat-wise, I guess stat-wise it was good, but Georgia, interesting. We don't even have Montrell Johnson, who I would still say is the best running back on this team. Although Ball and Jackson, there's fans who see their explosiveness that maybe are like, oh, we should start them. But then go look at that Tennessee game where their defensive line might be better than both Georgia and Texas. Montrell was the only one who got anything going, and he actually had a really good game against them. So give Montrell a ton of credit there. But I'm excited to push back away that Texas game. I mean, hopefully after this show, it'll just be completely out of mind, even though I know it won't be. I know we're going to watch other shows or anything other, see tweets and stuff to where people are going to be predicting the LSU game and future games based on what we did against Texas. Do you have any plans on how you're going to try to forget this game?
Well, I'm going to try to forget this game by probably just trying to, I would say watch some Florida basketball, but that kind of has its own issues right now. So I guess I'll try to forget this game by just watching some other teams that, they're teams that are not 4 and 5 on the season. This is all I can do. Well,
it was just announced that Todd Golden still will be coaching the game Monday against Grambling State, which does bring a little bit of confidence that because he also said they've been working through this for the past month. So it does bring a little bit of confidence that he is innocent in this situation and that the basketball program can move on. So I still have a bit of excitement left for this basketball team. We have a little bit easier of a schedule. Is there anything you want to see from the basketball team Monday?
I mean, I'd like to see I think the biggest concern I have right now is that the kind of lack of a true point guard in replacing Zion Pullen. Like, I think Walter Clayton's doing a pretty decent job in that regard, but I would just like to see, I think, continued, facilitation from the backcourt. I think, I'd like to see, I think this team's a little bit more undersized than what last year's was. So I think I just want to see a little bit better on the rebounding department because I think they kind of struggled in that regard against Jacksonville too. So
I'll also say Walter Clayton against our last opponent. Who did we play on Thursday?
Jacksonville.
That's right. Yeah. Only 9 points, but 7 assists. You really saw him slow down the game. A couple 3-pointers that he could have taken, probably makes a couple of them that he decided not to try to make extra passes. So yeah, it's definitely him trying to fill into that pulling role. So I still have a lot of hope for this team and having a true point guard.
Yeah.
But next, what I want to get into, if Billy still is the coach, which I would say is the direction we're going, what is he going to need to bring to this team for Florida to win 9, 10 games as you would hope that you would in year 4? So I tasked you with going through the offense. I went through the defense. Let's start with I'll start with you on the offense where you want to start.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's look at I think the quarterback position first of all, because I think obviously the entire thing with bringing Billy back is that you're keeping DJ Lagway in the fold, keeping him around for a sophomore season in which he could be, a Heisman candidate. I think that might be a bit of a stretch to say right now, but I think he has looked good enough in the limited amounts that we've seen him to say that is a possible ceiling for him. But beyond him, I mean, I think we've seen this season, you need to have a better backup quarterback situation. I don't know if Aiden Warner or Clay Millen are that guy moving into next year. So I think, you look at obviously Tramel Jones, the guy they're trying to flip from Florida State. We'll see how that works out. I don't know if you want to be relying on a freshman for depth. I think you do need probably a backup quarterback. I think the running back room, honestly, like, maybe you try to find a guy, but I think you got to be feeling pretty good about the bodies in that running back room. Sorry,
we also do have 2 freshmen or 2 recruits committed, 1 4-star, 1 a 3-star. And if there's anybody that's on the staff that's been insanely impressive, you got to give it to Barge Luke.
Yeah, 100%. As not a lot of the Billy carryover guys from Louisiana like lived up to the hype, but he's one that I think you could say has. But I mean, that kind of brings us to the people blocking for the run game, which is where I think is going to require the most work this offseason. I think you're going to need multiple portal starters, probably. I mean, Brandon Crenshaw Dixon's a redshirt senior, so going to be moving on from him this year. And, I just don't know how great you feel about, guys like Damian George, who didn't play on Saturday. I think you probably feel pretty good about Austin Barber and Jake Slaughter, assuming both of them come back. They both certainly have the opportunity to do so. But I think they'll be looking for some help on the right side of the offensive line and really at the interior spots. I think when you talk about, the idea of Florida going really hard in the portal this year, I think that's a big part of it is going to be going and getting proven offensive line talent, which is not an easy thing to do. It's kind of been 50-50 in whether that actually works when teams try to do that. And in the receiving game, I mean, I think you're going to lose some production. Like you've got Elijah Badger is going to be moving on. DK is going to be moving on. But, and I think, and this is not like reporting, this is just speculation. I think you can, I kind of feel like Trey Wilson's probably going to be moving on. Wouldn't surprise me at least. I would operate as if he's not going to be there, and if he is, great. But I think you like some of the what you're seeing from young receivers. You like maybe Tank Hawkins with his speed. But I think transfer receiver gonna be massively necessary. Again, I think you hit it pretty well with DK and Badger this offseason. You got what you needed from those guys. I think you need to go do it again and probably do something more along the lines of like a Juice Wells type move, kind of looking back at this past cycle, like a move of that caliber. Again, if for nothing else, because you got to sell, this class you're bringing in, sell another year at Billy. And truthfully, maybe you got to find a tight end too, because I thought Arliss Boardingham would have a big season. And he really hasn't, has been kind of MIA the last few weeks.
Yep.
And Hayden Hanson's a good player, but he's not really a big factor in the receiving game.
Yeah. Going back to the offensive line, one name that we could see in the transfer portal, I'm not saying he's going to 100% enter. Deion Sanders, do we think he's going to be coaching Colorado next year? I mean, losing his sons.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people say that, like that he's kind of staying through his son, like just to coach his sons, and like maybe that's the case. But I think he's got a real opportunity here to build something pretty good at Colorado. So, and I'm not sure if the better job is going to come calling this cycle. Just with the Florida's probably being a cycle away from opening as things currently stand. I think everyone in general is going to be kind of slow to make a lot of big moves in this cycle with the uncertainty. So
Where I was getting to that with, they have a 5-star freshman offensive tackle, big
yeah,
Gator target last year, Jordan Seaton. He's been
yeah,
absolutely amazing for them. And he's only a freshman, probably Colorado's best offensive lineman already. If Dion leaves, I guarantee he's going to enter the portal. We know he has a good relationship with our staff. If we're going to be dishing out all that money that Pete Nako says we are, I feel like he's going to be one of those top names that we have to go after. And then, so going on just from him, Seaton, center Jake Slaughter, he's been grading out as I think the best center in the SEC, one of the best centers in college football. We could see him go to the draft. Barber's been really good as well. We could see both those guys go for the draft. I think our young talent in the offensive line is there right now to make up for it, because you have 4 stars like Fletcher Westfall, Roderick Kearney, Jason Zandamilla, Marcus Maskell, and Caden Jones, who we heard a lot about Caden Jones in the offseason. So I bet they have a lot of high hopes for him. So I definitely want to see us go after maybe 1 or 2, depending on how many people leave, transfers. Yeah. But I'd also love to see us get the young guys on the line to the standard. But then when you also look at the receiver room, if you have a QB like DJ Lagway returning, he alone is going to be able to sell himself 2 targets. We've also seen Billy be good with wide receivers in the transfer portal, with Ricky Pearsall, with Elijah Badger, with Chimere Dike, having his young receiver step up. You also bring in a 5-star in Vernell Brown, another 4-star in Nashawn Montgomery. There are some people hinting at some big-time name wide receiver in the SEC who is really looking at Lagway, and if Florida dishes up the money for him, there's a good chance that he would come to Florida. So I do think there's a good chance that we still have a good receiver room next year.
How about what if Ohio State loses to Indiana and Jeremiah Smith were to enter the transfer portal? Because Ryan Day gets fired is my implication there.
Yeah, I get Brian Hartline's gone. That's really the big thing there.
Yeah,
Brian Hartline.
Yeah.
I mean, if that happens, I do see if we're putting out that money, because Ole Miss's class was $10 million this year. That's what it was reported at, to bring in Walter Nolan, Princely, bunch of defensive guys who I'll get into.
Yeah.
How many of those big names could we go after? I mean, every Gator fan wanted Jeremiah Smith to come here originally. So I would definitely love to get him here next year when he's proven to be one of the best receivers in college football already.
Yeah, no, 100%.
All right, so we're going to get into the defense. I want to start off with what I think the biggest need is. So I'm going to name some names off for you. Tell me if you notice a pattern or a theme. Isaiah Hamilton, Brandon Turnage, Yam Banks, Trey Amos, Lewis Moore, Chris Graves, Jordan Kennedy, and John Saunders. Do you know these guys at all?
I mean, I know you just listed a lot of Ole Miss's defense.
Yeah, so I didn't count them, but that's all but 1 player in the Ole Miss secondary was recruited, or in the 2 deep of the Ole Miss secondary was recruited by Ole Miss. The rest of these guys, that was like 8 players I just named, all were transfers. So what Florida needs to do for that safety and maybe cornerback room, maybe a little less, we need to go into the transfer portal and especially the safety room, get like 2-3 transfer safeties. Maybe Asa Turner next year will get a red shirt so he can come back and have his final season. But Jordan Castell, unless you somehow see him take that improvement, you can't risk it. You need to go and get some all SEC level safety out the portal. Jason Marshall probably being the only corner to leave, maybe like Jakeem Jackson. He's dealing with injury, so I wouldn't say that right now. But so maybe you want to go also get a cornerback 1 to go along with Devin Moore and Dijon and Cormani. But really what I'm focused on is that safety room. You're also going to be losing Trequez Bridges and DJ Douglas, 2 one-year safety guys. Bridge has been really good for us. Douglas, not as much. But the star room as well, you still have Gates and Denson, who are looking fantastic. So we also do bring in a true freshman, Ben Hanks, who's currently rated in the top 100, the 247 composite. So he is a good name to bring in for a corner. No safeties. We do have a young player, Greg Smith, was a 4-star. He has the frame. a high potential guy, but you still just need to go in and get 2 safety, 3 safeties to come in next year and really revamp this DB room.
Yeah, I think what you just said there, the main line was you can't afford it. Like you can like these guys and these young players in the secondary, but you can't afford to run the risk of going into another offseason relying on unproven young depth guys. You just can't do it because we've gotten burned multiple times before, you know?
Absolutely. So next, the linebacker room. So most of the year, I have felt really good about this linebacker room. I'm starting to get some questions, though, about going into next year. So one, Shamar James, I feel like he hasn't been as good as I wanted him to be. I don't know if there's maybe a system or a culture fit that's not really working out right now. You did have Jay Bateman leave this room, which maybe that hindered him a bit. And Patrick Tony left after his first year. They were really close. I know that. So maybe there's some type of culture thing that's going on there with Shamar James. Maybe he does return for his senior season. Maybe he gets a lot of draft attention or some reason. So I think you do need to go look at linebackers. Maybe not a star, because we're talking about all these star players you want to get. You can't get all of them, but you do. I'm
sorry.
All right.
I'm sorry.
Good. You're good.
I like backed out.
Okay, it's okay. But I was saying, you can't get all of these star players. So sometimes you just have to go for guys who are okay and maybe some depth pieces. Because we are going to return 2 true sophomores in Pup Howard and Miles Graham, as well as Jada Robinson, who I think has really been a big surprise that he is stepping up. So you return those guys. So I would like us to get one guy in the portal. But I feel like overall, the linebacker room is good. Just maybe one guy, depending on how Shamar goes. We do have a 3-star who flipped from Alabama, Miles Johnson, committed. Do you have anything you want to say on the linebacker room?
I mean, not really. I think, probably a strength of the team on defense right now, I would say, in terms of the future outlook. I mean, I'm not sure if there's any area I would say you don't need any help at all, but I think that's assuming you're not suffering a ton of attrition there. I think you got to feel pretty good about where that room's looking.
And then the next room, so outside linebacker, they line up off the ball. They sometimes line up on the line. We're looking at George Gums. I think he's probably been the most surprising good player on this defense. He was a wide receiver when he went to Northern Illinois, converted to linebacker, defensive end, whatever you want to call it. He converted there, and I feel like he's been really good for this team. Good pass rush. He should have had the interception against Texas, but I feel like he's a really good player. He's as well as backed up by a young guy in Aaron Childs. So I feel like that room's good. Maybe there's a guy in the portal you like who's a young guy that can, after Gums leaves, he can be like the backup to Childs. But that room, I think, is pretty good. And then, so going off to the more defensive end, edge position even. So I think the biggest need here, we need an elite player. I like Tyreek Sapp. Joey Slackman's going to be leaving. We do bring in a guy like Jalen Wiggins, who is near the top 100. He's committed as a freshman. I like Sapp. I like Cameron James. I like Justice Boone. James may be a higher bit of upside. But none of those guys really scream like disruptor. Like none of those guys are going to have like a 10-sack season next year. So I think what we need to do, go into the portal. We need to go and get like a Nick Scorton, or Tennessee has like a James Pierce. We need to go get one of those guys to help this team take it to the next level. Because right now, unless you're scheming something up, it's just not there with the pass rush. They can't really win money one-on-ones. I mean, I assume you agree. Yeah.
No, I do. I think that it's just not good enough. And I think we thought, looking at guys like Justice Boone coming into this year, like maybe it could be. But it's just not. And, I think, maybe LJ McCray can kind of be that guy, kind of help get you some disruption there. Haven't really seen a ton of gotten the opportunity to see a ton of it this year, I would say. But I mean, I think, Yeah, it's just not where it needs to be, and I think I would agree. If I'm looking to spend a lot of cash in the transfer portal this offseason, I would say outside of the secondary, nowhere more I'm trying to invest it than in getting a primo edge rusher.
Yeah, you also got Jack Pyburn, who's a really good run stuffer. Not as much of a pass rusher, but really good run stuffer. Probably on the opposite side of that elite edge rusher you want. But then going to the defensive nose tackle, defensive tackle, switch it out a bit. So we will be losing Cam Jackson and Desmond Watson, two, big bodies for us who have been really solid in the run stopping department. So the guys we have on the current roster, so guys probably got forgot about. Jamari Lyons, he got a season-ending injury before the season last year as a freshman. I thought he showed a lot of potential, so I do like him going into next year. You also have Mekhi Barrow, who I didn't expect to do as well as he's done as a true freshman, and DeAndre Robinson. I don't know if Robinson is much of a nose tackle as the other two are, but I do think, assuming this team wants to be at a 10-level win next year with the transfer portal class, you do need to go and get a good deep nose tackle in next year for next season.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the entirety of the defensive line this year, while I would say it hasn't been like I don't think the front seven's been as bad as we thought it could be.
No.
I think it's not where it needs to be. So I fully agree. I think both interior and on the outside defensive line, you got to find some portal help.
You do have a guy like Stephon Shivers. He's a recruit who just decommitted from Georgia, has two visits scheduled with Florida. I mean, I don't know if you saw the picture of this guy. This is one of the most jacked high school players I have ever seen. Like Branson Robinson, when he went to Georgia, his thighs, like everyone was talking about how big he is. I mean, this guy has the arms. He could be someone that's like a true disruptor for us in the future. But for next season, we definitely need to go look at somebody in the portal. But I think if we can do some of those things we've said, because we're obviously not going to go get elite players at the offensive line, wide receiver, safety, linebacker, or edge roam. I think if we can do a couple of those things, have some young players develop going into 2025, we could have a good season.
Yeah, no, fully.
Oh, man. Rob, ACC has a ton of pass rushers. Go get Patrick Payton from FSU. Has he been disappointed this year?
Yeah, I mean, I tabbed him as my preseason ACC Defensive Player of the Year, and that has not gone too well. But, FSU just fired their pretty much entire non-Mike Norvell coaching staff today. So maybe the problem isn't him, but certainly has been pretty disappointing filling in for Jared Verse.
Did you see who they is the replacement DC?
Randy Shannon has now been the DC for all three of the big three Florida teams.
If it's not going to happen, but if FSU did fire Mike Norvell and he was the interim head coach, he would also be there for him. He would have been a head coach for a game for all three teams or interim.
That's crazy.
Interesting here
with reasons. Yeah. Few
No
reasons
hate.
here. I know you can go. Go ahead.
You go ahead.
All I was going to say is, I mean, first of all, I don't think they want to fire him. I think they want to, try to avoid that outcome because of the money. It would be one of the biggest buyouts in college football history. Also, the uncertainty at a university level. No president right now, interim president. So no one really to make that decision from above, which would probably include getting rid of the athletic director too. So that's why it kind of looks like right now they're posturing towards keeping Billy, I would say.
Absolutely. And if you fire him, you're either going to be putting – it's already a ridiculous amount of money to fire Napier. But if you want next season to be good and say you want to keep DJ Lagway, you're just going to have to put a ton more money into the roster for next season. And it feels like this team, they need some wins next season. And your best chance at that probably is keeping Napier and hoping that the last 4 games we had, not including Texas, was a more sign of things to come than the Texas game was. Maybe we'll see that against LSU and Ole Miss. A small part of my heart belongs to Florida, born and raised, just went to Tennessee. Yeah. From the Tennessee side, this rivalry, not as good, but hey, we got to win this year, so.
Yeah, I'd probably rather be the Vols right about now, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Although QB Nico did just get hurt, so.
That is true. That is true.
Oh, man. So the next segment we're going to get into, we're going to be talking about DJ Lagway's team impact. So I think the thing with DJ Lagway isn't just that he helps the offense score points. I think he lets the defense also get less time on the field, and he's not going to put them in as many of bad spots as we have with Warner. I'll let you get into it.
Yeah, I mean, all I'm gonna say is like I think that I think that we saw early in the game. Like I agree with kind of where you were going with that. I think we saw, if I'm trying to be optimistic, I think you saw early in the game the defense kind of came out of the gate with some energy on Saturday. Had some nice plays on the first possession or two, but I think it became pretty apparent that the offense was not going to be able to keep up in this game, and I think that's pretty demoralizing. So I agree. I mean, DJ Lagway, like it speaks for itself. I mean, if Florida's going to have a chance to win these next 2 weeks, it almost certainly needs to have DJ Lagway on the field. Because I mean, obviously, the complementary football element of it, but I mean, he just straight up elevates the offense. I think elevates it even to an extent beyond where the level it was with Graham Mertz, who I think does some things better than DJ Lagway. Lagway's thrown a couple rough interceptions and has missed some balls. Like he's had freshman moments that Graham Mertz doesn't have. I mean, say what you will about Graham Mertz, but a complete boneheaded decision with the football is rarely one of them. So is rarely one of the issues he has.
Yeah.
So, I think looking at this offense, I mean, we've seen what it looks like with Aiden Warner. I mean, maybe Clay Millen's something different, but if you haven't seen him by now, I'd say you're probably not going to see him. So looking ahead to LSU, and we'll kind of get more into LSU in a little bit, but I mean, I think having Lagway on this team, just to close the year, I mean, I think it's the difference between seeing a team completely fold and a team fight down the stretch for their coach who, maybe his fate is not entirely sealed one way or the other yet.
I do think DJ helps the defense a ton. I mean, if you look back at the Texas game, 2 bad interceptions by Aiden Warner. I'm not going to say DJ doesn't doesn't have any interceptions, but you kind of got to hope that your starting QB doesn't have interceptions that bad. I mean, that first interception from Warner, he just threw it straight to the defensive player for Texas. So I think he limits the time the defense is on the field. He's also not going to I guess the team could fumble still, like Jacoby Jackson's fumble where they then went up 14-0. Doesn't go up 14-0. So, okay, so it's still 7-0. Maybe we still end up punting. So maybe they still do end up scoring, but I mean, maybe they don't. Maybe when we get into the red zone, we actually finish the drive, which results in a touchdown. And instead of the game still being 14-0, it's 14-7. And then that other drive where we had the next one, I believe it was, we also drove down the field. Maybe instead of it being 14-0, now it's 14-10. Maybe it's 14-14. I'm not going to go out crazy and say that we win this game. I'm just going to say with him on the field, you probably take away some of those lackadaisical plays from Warner. And you probably add some big plays for Lagway, which going into this LSU game, we've seen Lagway isn't necessarily the most mobile quarterback like a Jalen Milroe is or like Lamar Jackson's or anyone like that, Riley Leonard at Notre Dame. But he's a willing runner and he's a big physical runner. So I think you add on to this team. You look at the run game with Jackson and Ball, and hopefully Montrell Johnson comes back. I feel like going into the LSU game, this is a run game that could go for, again, 200, 250 yards on LSU. That hasn't necessarily been the best run defense in the country. So you add him, you open up the run game more. Elijah Badger, I don't know when he got hurt, so maybe it was in practice. Maybe it was just a minor injury. He got against Georgia and finished the game. What was the chance that they kind of just sat him? I talked about earlier how we kind of just punted the game and just accepted that it was going to likely be a loss. I wonder if Badger kind of just sat out for that reason. Mm-hmm. So you add a player like Badger to this offense, who's probably the best receiver on the team right now. So I think you add him, and that adds a lot to the team.
Yeah, I do wonder. I mean, maybe they did just punt on that game specifically. I mean, I'll be honest, I'm a little skeptical about how likely it is Lagway actually plays on Saturday.
Uh,
I do wonder if there was an element of just gamesmanship to
mhm.
that, the way he was handled all week. And I kind of can't help but wonder if maybe he wasn't quite as, the fact that he came back out in street clothes, like it's like maybe he wasn't quite as close to playing as they kind of tried to frame it to be.
Well, one thing I will say, the early betting lines came out for this game. I've seen two different ones. One that had it LSU -5.5, and one that had LSU
Yeah,
-7. I feel like those betting lines do suggest that they think Lagway will play. Because if Warner were in
100%.
there, I think Florida would be 10 plus 20, maybe. Probably not 20, but 10 plus underdogs to LSU, even though it's home. I think Lagway does end up playing, and I think he's really going to elevate the run game as well as the pass game. And I go back to like Badger. Is he going to play? Is he going to play as well? I mean, Damian George. Does Lagway playing push him to play? And you talked about early in the game, the defense came out with a lot of hype into the game. But then as the game went on, they kind of just, I would say they gave up near the end of the game.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, and I think it's demoralizing when the offense just can't do anything. So
It
I
absolutely
think
is.
you have to hope that if Lagway's playing next week, you get enough going, even if he's limited, that you get enough going that LSU, you know, or that the defense just doesn't just completely keel over and let LSU move the ball down the field at will.
Last thing I'll get on to Lagway's impact on that Georgia game. We have a fan saying that if Lagway finishes that Georgia game, Florida wins that game. I'm not going to say it's a guarantee. In
Mhm.
my opinion, we end up winning that game. But I mean, it's hard to say we don't when you look at how the rest of the game went with Warner not doing really anything. I mean, but that's also saying that the defense continues to play lights out. Because you also look at the defense playing lights out for most of that Georgia game. They also were playing trying to win for Lagway. So I wonder if him being back causes the defense to relax a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly could. And I mean, also, I really don't think LSU, while they're good on offense, I don't think they're just loaded with the skill and speed in the way that Texas is.
Absolutely. But I mean, just overall, I think we can both agree this team is substantially better with Lagway on the field. How much
100%.
better do you think this team is with Lagway than with Mertz, if at all?
I think right now, like if you would ask me, earlier in the season, like I think when Lagway first was coming into games, it was probably a little bit better with Mertz. But
Mhm.
I think all it took him was a couple games to really show. And I think there needs to be an element of Billy's play calling that kind of is more, you know, flows better with the way he plays, because I think you could have a really prolific passing offense with DJ Lagway at quarterback, and I don't think Billy's offense is really built to do that right now. So I think
Mhm.
that's where, I think the potential with DJ Lagway is sky high compared to Mertz. Whether in this actual Billy offense, I don't quite know how much it raises the ceiling.
I have to agree. I think the ceiling is definitely way higher with Lagway. If you looked at Louisiana, he had Levi Lewis, who is also a more mobile QB as well. So it's not just the arm talent you're looking at compared to Lagway with Mertz. So I feel like you also look back with Anthony Richardson. The offense does cater to a more mobile quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
So even if he does say commit more turnovers, I do think in the red zone also the team is going to be much better with Lagway.
Absolutely.
Get into some comments. Do you guys from Mike Hasker? Do you guys really believe that Napier will return in 2025? I think the only way, maybe not the only way, but I think the most likely way he doesn't return is if we lose to FSU. Even if he doesn't lose to FSU, I don't think it's that likely. I mean, we're still going to be dealing with the basketball stuff more than likely. It's still a ton of money to fire him, so I think we do have FSU. I mean, I do think we have Napier in 2025.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'm not saying there's not a reality where the things break and he's gone.
Hmm.
And I think, like you said, losing to FSU, that'd probably do it.
Hmm.
But I just kind of lean towards, even though I don't necessarily like think that Strickland putting out that statement completely closes the book on the discussion.
Hmm.
I think that, like I've talked about it before, I just think at the university level, there's just too many variables and too much uncertainty right now that, and the money. I mean, like, Billy's buyout isn't huge compared to like Mike Norvell's or whatever, but it
No,
would still be, again, one of the biggest. I mean,
I
Jimbo's was such an outlier.
the
Like,
second biggest. I'm pretty
yeah,
sure.
that's what I thought. That's what I thought. Yeah, I didn't want to say that and be wrong, but I think you're right. I'm pretty sure it's the second biggest. So, like, it's a lot of money we're talking about here. Um, and I, who's going to fire him? Like, truthfully, who's going to fire him? Is it Scott Strickland, who probably can't afford to? Is it Kent Fox, the interim president? Like, I don't know.
Hmm. In his next point, do you think Lagway puts feelers out or tests the portal? If Billy Napier is here, I'm 99% confident Lagway returns. There's 1% chance that some fallout happens. But if that fallout happens, I feel like there's also a chance Billy is fired then. But as long as Billy's here, I think Lagway stays in Florida.
Yeah, well, it's like that's the whole thing. Like
Hmm.
that's the whole logic behind it. So if he doesn't, like if they keep Billy and then Lagway enters the portal, I mean that's about as disastrous as things
Yeah,
could possibly get.
absolutely is. Rob, Billy's using DJ's injury to save his job. I think he holds him out until FSU. I mean, going back to how I mentioned the betting odds, Vegas usually has a good eye for this stuff. I mean, we saw it a lot earlier in the year, to where we don't really know as much. But with the odds only being 5.5, I still feel pretty confident that we are going to see DJ Lagway play against LSU and hopefully lead us to a victory.
Yeah, I mean, Rob, my kind of issue with that logic is just like, I mean, maybe that's happening, but I mean, at the end of the day, if you lose these two games and maybe the quarterback injuries do help him, in terms of selling the future. But if you lose these two games and you beat FSU even and finish 5-7, like you're still 5-7. Like I'm not
Mm-hmm.
sure he would just intentionally throw games like that because of this, with the situation he's in.
I think I'd rather lose these games by like 1 point or like one score games with Lagway than bench Lagway and lose these games by 30 points, 40 points, like we just saw.
Yeah, I agree.
So we're going into the LSU game. So luckily for us here, Tyler Natuno used to work for LSU or did work with LSU. So he has a pretty good understanding of this team, better than I do or anyone watching probably. So let's get into our Florida LSU predictions. I'll let you start off.
Yeah, I mean, this is an LSU team that, first of all, I mean, lost a lot, especially on the offensive side of the ball from the team that the Gators saw last year. I mean, you guys, if you follow the NFL, you know it. Jaden Daniels, Brian Thomas, Malik Neighbors, these guys are all making big plays on Sundays, and they were making big plays on Saturdays for this team last year. And I mean, I don't think you'd be surprised to find out that without them, this isn't quite as explosive an offense as it was last year. It's still a successful one. Like, in terms of expected points added and offensive efficiency and stuff, it's a good offense, but it's not just killing you with big plays the way that they did last year. So I think coming into this year with this team, I was concerned about that and a defense that was really bad. Defense has maybe taken a few steps forward. I mean, this is a tough team to evaluate because defensively, they've sort of improved throughout the year, though the last two games have been major setbacks coming
Mm-hmm.
into this one, which I would have my eyes on if Lagway's on the field because, while Lagway's not Jalen Milrow and he's not Marcel Reed in terms of mobility within the pocket, he is a guy that can get outside and move around. And that's just something that LSU has not handled very well
No.
in recent weeks. I think I don't know if I trust. I would say I was pretty high on Garrett Nussmeier still up until last night.
Yeah.
And I mean, we saw what happened in that game against Alabama, 42-13 loss. I think, this offense and Garrett Nussmeier, it's just not quite good enough. I think it's pretty obvious you can cause a lot of problems with this LSU team if you
Mm-hmm.
get pressure on them up front. I mean, A&M, only sacked him twice. Or sorry, only sacked him once, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
and he'd only been sacked twice all year. But they got some pressure on him and forced some
Yeah.
interceptions, forced 3 pretty bad interceptions in that game. So if Florida can do that, I think you're gonna get bad. You're gonna get like not Quinn Ewers. You're gonna get Carson Beck-esque mistakes out of Garrett Nussmeier in this game, but you couldn't get that pressure on Quinn Ewers, and you got absolutely picked apart. So to me, like, and I'm not gonna get we'll get into score predictions in a little bit, but like, I think Florida winning this game is going to be so dependent on the health of the secondary
Mm-hmm.
and obviously the health of DJ Lagway because, I mean, LSU is going to score.
They might not score. I mean, so you talked about how he was only sacked once. Garrett Nussmeier was only sacked once against A&M or twice. I can't remember what you said,
I
but
believe it was once.
that's a pretty common theme to where teams get pressure on LSU. I remember the South Carolina game. South Carolina was getting so much pressure on Garrett Nussmeier.
Yeah.
But Nussmeier is really good at avoiding sacks. So that's one thing you got to give him credit for. But then you put him on a hostile environment on the road. Maybe we're getting pressure. LSU, 2 tackles, first, possibly both going in the first round. Will Campbell probably in the top 10. Will Campbell, maybe more of a guard than tackle at the next level. I'm not going
Yeah,
to be.
he's had a bit of a disappointing season.
Yeah.
Been good. Don't get me wrong; he's a
Mhm.
good player. But a guy that was getting like legit top 5 pick.
Yeah. I've seen mock drafts with my Jaguars taking him first overall. That's how good this guy is. But I feel like he does have a higher upside as a guard in the NFL than as a tackle. So maybe the Gators find a way to take advantage of him not being maybe as elite as you want. And the interior of this LSU offensive line, it feels like this LSU offensive line has like 3 or 4 really good players on it, but they're not playing as good as a unit, which is allowing teams to get pressure on Nussmeier, which we've seen this Gator defensive front. We saw it against UCF, saw it against Tennessee, saw it against Kentucky. We saw it against Georgia, saw it a little bit early on against Texas, to where they're showing different things and they're getting pressure. And Garrett Nussmeier, he's an older player. I'm not saying older player, but he's been at LSU for 3 years now. But this is still only his 10th, 9th start going into this game. So he's necessarily not the most experienced. This might be the most hostile crowd he's faced. I mean, did they host A&M? Okay,
no, they played
A&M.
at A&M.
So, and we saw what happened against A&M. He threw 3 interceptions against them.
Yeah,
had 2 interceptions last night against Alabama and a fumble that really ended the game mostly. So this is a guy that we know can turn over the ball. And this is a defense to where taking away that Texas game, the past month had been getting a bunch of turnovers. I think really that's going to be the matchup that really wins or loses Florida this game. Because when I look at the offense, I think this offense is going to be able to score 30 points pretty simply. Not easily, but I do think if this offense doesn't score 28 plus points, that it is a big failure, assuming Lagway is above like 90, 95%. That's how I'm making my prediction. Lagway is like almost 100% healthy. Mm-hmm. So going into this game, I can definitely see the defense holding this team because A&M, LSU against A&M, LSU scored 17 points.
Yes.
Okay. LSU against Alabama, they had 13 points, but that included a garbage time.
Yeah.
So I don't really see it. This LSU team is also now eliminated from the playoff. How much are they playing for? Has Brian Kelly built up the culture? I mean, that we've kind of seen at Florida since the beginning of the season, to where they're going to be down a bunch. But, I mean, they can still play for 9 wins. They still can play for some momentum going into next year. So I'm very interested to see how that defensive-offensive matchup works.
Yeah, and I think looking back at what you were talking about getting pressure on LSU, I mean, I think to me, like, yeah, the absolute number one matchup I'm looking at in this game is LSU's offensive line, which is one of the best in the nation. against this front, which now, granted, that offensive line is now without Garrett Dellinger, the starting left guard, one of the biggest veterans on the defense, had like a sort of like quick surgery. I don't think he's necessarily done for the year, but I don't think he's playing in this game. So, they're down a guy there, and they kind of are turning towards younger, not particularly experienced players. When it comes to depth on the offensive line, not great there. Granted, few teams have great offensive line depth, but
yeah,
I think that's something worth watching. And I agree with you. I mean, I think the offense can score if Lagway plays, and I don't think there's really any, value in predicting this game in a world where Lagway doesn't play, because we're all adults here. I think we know what's going to happen if it's Aiden Warner again. So,
yeah. And then going a little bit deeper on the Florida offense versus the LSU defense, Whit Weeks has been turning it up for LSU. Probably been their best defensive, definitely been their best defensive player, I'd say, since he started turning it up, since Harold Perkins took his season injury. So when you look at it, I think this Florida offensive line has still been playing really well. LSU defensive line, I mean, they have Savion Jones. I'm not sure how many guys scare me on the LSU defensive line. I mean, maybe I'm missing someone. I mean, am I?
Braden Swinson, the edge rusher, has been one of the better edge defenders in the SEC this year.
Okay. So maybe I am missing on him, but I mean, Savion Jones is good. Swinson, that does, I remember that bit now, is definitely that good. But then, is that going to be enough to stop Florida's run game? Does Montreal also return to where maybe we get out to a slower start, but Montreal is beating them down? That's possible. And then you bring in Ball and Jackson to hit off the big plays later in the game. LSU secondary, I mean, you saw it earlier in the year. They gave up 400 passing yards to USC. I wouldn't say A&M could really throw on anybody with Connor Weigman nor Marcel Reed. No. Jalen Milroe was doing a lot of his work through the ground. So we haven't really seen this LSU defense in a while play a really good passing offense. And maybe we're not even a really good passing offense. Maybe we're worse than Alabama. But I do think their secondary is still really weak. Sage Ryan, he's not even playing, is he?
I don't believe so. I think he might be hurt right now.
So I do have some faith in this Florida offense. Maybe you also get Lagway adjusted to making shorter plays. I mean, you look at him against Tennessee, where he gets thrown in there kind of as the full-time guy. 100,000 fans in the stands, makes a little bit of mishaps with the short game. Then Kentucky didn't really have anything short going. I feel like Kentucky didn't respect our deep ball at all for some reason that game.
Yeah.
And then Georgia, he gets hurt really on, so we don't even get to see him get a chance to throw short. So maybe LSU does play 3 deep safeties the entire game and just try to make Lagway beat him intermediately, which I think that could be what wins LSU this game.
Yeah, and I think Rob's comment right there about the front four. I'll just pull this up for a second because I think it makes a good point. This is where Florida could get into some real trouble in this game, is if they have to blitz and just get beat in the secondary. But I will say, though, I think the matchup I do really like here for the Gators is assuming Badger and Lagway are playing. I really like this matchup against the secondary. I think LSU secondary, I mean, frankly, it's a talent deficiency. It's just guys that are, sophomores and freshmen that have been expected to develop that haven't really developed. So it's an issue. LSU's been decent against the run this year. I think the front seven, with the injuries they've had, has actually been surprisingly good. I mean, they lost a guy in Jacoby and Guillory, who was like their only experienced returning defensive tackle, lost him early in the year. The Perkins loss was huge, although, Grant, to be fair, I think it almost looks like the defense has gotten better since Harold Perkins left. I almost wonder if they were getting too cute with it in terms of how they were using him, because it wasn't, they had him lining up at nickel. They were doing all sorts of kind of weird things with Harold Perkins, and now they've just got Whit Weeks, who's kind of the more traditional linebacker there, but he's all over the field. Flies over the field making plays. So I think I mean, Florida runs the ball. I mean, we saw Florida run the ball against a good front four, and a team that knew that's all they were going to do. So
Yep.
I think Florida's going to get their own in this game on the
Mm-hmm.
ground. And I think if all the guys on offense are playing, you could see some big plays open up in the passing game for sure.
So I think it's time to get to our predictions. I'll start this off. Maybe it's the bias in me, but I feel like losing this game is going to – if we lose this game, it might be on Billy Napier. I feel like there's just so many advantages in Florida's way. Like, maybe it's my bias, but, I mean, look through the air. I think Florida should win that matchup. Look on the ground with Lagway. If he has his mobility, I think Florida's matchup on the ground is going to be pretty good against our defense as well. So I feel like the offense, maybe not score at will, but should be able to score enough to where then the defense comes in. If they can get pressure on Nussmeier, if they just get enough pressure on him, Caden Durham, the freshman running back for LSU, he's been pretty good this year. LSU has just been abandoning the run. Like, I don't think they're necessarily a bad running team. I think Brian Kelly, I mean, maybe it's just the rain games. I know that was a big thing people talked about. It's where Brian Kelly just gives up on the run for some reason in rain games and forces a QB to throw it 40 times. So I think if we get into one of those situations where we force them to throw it, I think Florida's going to win. I think Florida wins the game. I'm going to take the Gators to win the game 34-24.
Wow. So I can see, like we've talked about, I can see a reality where that happens. I mean, and we have to be operating under the assumption that Lagway's playing, even though I don't think that's a given. I mean, I'll say this. I think LSU looks pretty vulnerable the way they've played the last two games.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you had asked me before the Texas game, knowing Lagway doesn't play, and we lose to Texas, I would still probably be feeling pretty good about the LSU game if he came back. The way the secondary got torched last week really scares me, especially with LSU's receiving core starting to get healthy. I mean, Chris Hilton Jr., a guy who had sort of like a bone bruise in his ankle in fall camp that became a prolonged injury, and he's just made his return in these last two games. So they're starting to get back to full strength on offense, and it scares me, especially with a lot of questions in the when it comes to the health of this secondary. I think Florida has a path to winning this game. Last week really took a lot of the wind out of my sails in terms of being optimistic about progress made. So I think I'm going to kind of go with the inverse of your score here. I think LSU wins this game. I'll say like 35-24.
35-24. I will say, we don't know the depth chart or the injury report that's going to come out. Devin Moore is another huge player that the Gators really need to be healthy. Because if Cormani is starting again, and the secondary just really hurt, I could definitely see to where my score prediction maybe was a little biased there. Or a little slanty, because I didn't even think about Devin Moore. If he plays, I do think that helps Florida a ton.
No, I mean, it for sure would. I mean, I think you need to get someone back in the secondary like that.
Rob. Yeah, maybe it – I don't know. I feel like when I made my prediction, I'm kind of taking that Texas game out of mind a bit. I do think Texas does have better weapons than LSU does. Or I feel like they do. No?
I agree. I think they do.
Okay.
I think they do.
And I mean, because then you have to worry about 4 or 5 players for Texas. When you're looking at LSU, maybe you worry about a little bit of a run. But then outside of that, Kyron Lacey is good. Aaron Anderson is good. Chris Hilton is good. Are they going to be those players, though, that make after the catch plays that just go 60 yards like Texas did?
I think Mason Taylor is the one to watch, the tight end. That's a tough matchup, I think, for this Gators team. I'm a little worried about that one.
That is also a good point there. Shamar James in coverage or Pup Howard. Pup Howard gave up a big route. I can't remember the name of the route. Or Texas route on a running back that resulted in a touchdown. Or I think he got him to like the 2-yard line to end the half. So maybe they do try to take advantage of also the run game or the running backs out the passing room. Because I do feel like the Gators in short yardage plays, It's where you let the player make the play after. That's probably our biggest weakness.
Mhm.
And they do like to get the ball out. LSU does like to get the ball out quick. So that could definitely come up to bite us.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Do you have any final remarks that you want to make?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, again, I'll just reiterate, 100% depends on DJ Lagway. I mean, in a reality where DJ Lagway is not playing, my score prediction probably looks somewhere along the lines of 41-10, or like, I mean, just being real, like that's kind of where I think this team is at offensively if he's not there. I mean, I think you got to be interested just based on what happened in that first half of the Georgia game. You know, I think you can see some parallels between Carson Beck and Garrett Nussmeier and the way that they'll respond to pressure. You know, I think, you know, I just think that I have a hard time believing all those pieces come together in the way that they need to win this game, especially against an LSU team that, I mean, maybe they're in complete free fall, like maybe they just spiral, but I think that, you know, they, you know, could, I think LSU has the potential to get right in this game against Florida.
Before the Texas A&M game, I predicted LSU to beat A&M. I had LSU winning out and running the table, even winning the SEC championship game. But I feel like the biggest threat to them has been Garrett Nussmeier, just not being able to handle the big pressure situations.
Mm-hmm.
You look back on them, the Ole Miss game they won. They put up 30 points in that game, or 29, including overtime. So 23 in regulation. So it's not like he had a crazy good game. He wasn't able to come up clutch against USC. Was a bit against the other USC, South Carolina. But South Carolina also probably wins that game if Lenora Sellers doesn't get hurt.
They also probably win the game if the refs don't call back a interception
That's
return because of the worst roughing the passer call I've
yep.
ever seen.
So I feel like you're also, and then LSU obviously lost to Bama, got blown out. I do also wonder if this is a close game, which team wins it? Because you've seen both of these teams in close games where LSU maybe got bailed out against South Carolina. You also give Brian Kelly the coaching edge in this game, obviously. Which team doesn't lose it? That could also be a very big factor in this game.
Yeah, I mean, if it's close, I mean, I think you got to feel like you've done something right in this game if you're Florida and you've got it close. I mean, especially if Lagway's not playing, but I think even if he is, so I mean, if this turns into a game where it's back and forth and both teams are scoring, or even if it's low scoring and just, you know, hanging around within a field goal of each other, like I think you got to give the advantage to the Gators there because that means, you know, one way or the other, that means that, you know, Florida's not getting completely torched in the secondary to the point where they can't keep up offensively. You know, I mean, something's going right to keep them there. So sure, like if I think in a close game, that I'd give the edge to Florida if it stays close like that.
You also have the crowd, man. The Swamp hasn't been announced as a sellout yet. But, I mean, I feel like if DJ Lagway is announced to play, I think this game will be sold out. I mean, Florida sold out. How many straight games is it? I don't even know. It's a really good amount of times they sold out.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you've seen us struggle on the road. So that's why I am leaning the Gators. And as Gregory said, if Lagway, Badger, and Moore play, we win. I think Moore might be the determining factor.
I agree. I think Devin Moore is as key as anyone in this game.
Rob, Billy Napier is your head coach. If it's close, you will lose. I do see that. Like, when you said that if it's a close game, I think you give the edge to Florida. I'm not sure you do. I mean, looking back through Napier's history, I mean, his first game against Utah, he won a close one. Amari Burney saved him really in that game with the game-winning pick in the end zone. But I mean, look back past that. Has Florida really been able to win those close games?
I mean, no. I mean, like honestly,
South Carolina last year.
Yeah, that's true.
Then it couldn't beat Georgia, you know, circumstances applied. Couldn't beat Tennessee, circumstances apply, you know.
Although they did hang on. They did kind of hang on to beat Tennessee last year in a game where they sort of jumped on them early. And then, I mean, I don't know how much you count that, but.
I don't really count that. I mean, they still had Joe Milton, so them having to throw it a ton was just that game was never really in question for me. Because by the time they made it a 2-score game, it was like 10 minutes left. And I mean, Billy was just chewing clock like crazy in that game. So I don't really count that. But maybe you can. So if it's a close game, I honestly don't know which way it's going to go. I mean, I would hope Edge Florida as a fan. I'm going to be at this game. So I will be screaming as loud as I can and hoping that the Gators do pull out the win.
Yeah, and I'll just say my saying I lean Florida if it's close is not necessarily because I like have all this faith in Billy Napier as a late game manager. It's honestly more stems from the fact that I kind of don't have as much faith in the Gators as Tyler does. And so it's like if they're keeping it close, I'm like they're doing something right here. Like there's something about this game that's going pretty well for them.
I do want to take a quick look to see what the weather is going to be like on Saturday because that could play a factor. But, I mean, early forecasts show no signs of rain. It's going to be in the 70s. So it's going to be basically a perfect weather day for football. So really the best team is going to probably pull off the win there. And do you have anything else to say before we end the stream?
No, I mean, I just think, really important week, I think, for, if Billy Napier is going to recapture some momentum and because assuming he's going into 2025 as the coach, if you're going to recapture some momentum and go into it just without being the most pre-fired coach in college football, probably has to start with a win here. So got to get the job done in this game.
Definitely agree. Unless Lagway doesn't play, you need to win this game. But that being said, you see both of our Twitters on the screen. I'm at TWForGator. He's at Tyler Natuno on Twitter. Go follow us. You can also subscribe, like the channel. You can go check out other Voice of College Football channels and the main channel. We appreciate everyone that's come to watch. We will see you guys on the post-game show, probably 2 hours after the Florida LSU game. And that being said, have a great rest of your night and have a great week.